My name is Elena Carter. I'm 38 years old, a business consultant, a wife, and until recently, a woman who believed she had a caring, devoted family. The house where I spent my childhood still stands at the corner of Maple Street. White walls, blue-framed windows, a modest garden my father never once tended but never missed an opportunity to show off to the neighbors. The property is legally mine. I purchased it 8 years ago, once my business had finally found its footing. My parents were struggling financially at the time, so I invited them to move in. It didn't feel like generosity, it felt like the obvious thing to do. They were my parents. My husband Daniel spends most of the year abroad overseeing company projects, which meant our household was usually just the three of us. Or so I assumed. Every morning, my mother would sip her coffee on the balcony and casually tell passers-by, "This has always been our family home." I never corrected her. Recognition didn't matter to me. I only wanted a quiet, peaceful life. 2 months ago, that peace shattered. I came home from work one evening to find my parents in a state of barely contained excitement. My father was pacing the living room, clutching a small slip of paper in trembling hands. My mother looked as though she'd witnessed something supernatural. "We won," she breathed. I laughed it off. "Won what?" My father pointed the television screen toward me, and there they were, the lottery numbers, every single one matching. $65 million. For a moment, none of us said a word. Then my mother burst into a joyful scream and threw her arms around me. We celebrated like giddy children that night, ordered extravagant food, called every relative we could think of, and my parents kept marveling at how life had finally seen fit to reward them. I was genuinely happy for them. After years of hardship, they deserved a stroke of luck. But something shifted almost immediately. By the very next morning, my mother was already deep in plans. Luxury cars, hired help, first-class travel, a full renovation of the house. Not suggestions, not conversations, just decisions already made. Workers appeared 2 days later without a word of warning. They measured rooms, repositioned furniture, and debated changes as though I were invisible. When I asked what was going on, my father shrugged with an easy smile. "Things are different now," he said. Different. That single word lodged itself in my mind and wouldn't leave. The neighbors began treating my parents like local celebrities overnight. People came to offer congratulations. Journalists turned up at the door. And gradually, painfully, I began to notice something that hurt far more than any argument could. Whenever anyone asked about the house, my parents referred to it simply as our home. Not the family home. Not their daughter's home. Theirs, and theirs alone. I told myself it was temporary. Money has a way of unsettling people, and I was sure they'd come back to themselves. I was wrong. A week later, Daniel flew to Singapore for an extended project. I drove him to the airport, kissed him goodbye, and told him everything at home was fine. I didn't want him carrying that weight across the ocean. That evening I returned expecting the usual shared dinner. Instead, I found my suitcases lined up beside the front door. At first I assumed my mother was reorganizing. Then she looked at me not with warmth, not with welcome, but with the cold, measured gaze of someone who had already made a decision. My father stood silently behind her. My pulse quickened. "Why are my bags by the door?" I asked. My mother folded her arms. Her voice was composed, almost detached. "Elena," she said, "things have changed." And somewhere deep inside me, something quietly gave way. I forced a smile, convinced for a fleeting second that this had to be a joke. "What do you mean?" My mother's eyes swept the living room, the same room I had furnished, financed, and decorated from nothing. There was no warmth in her gaze, only calculation, like someone surveying what they now considered their territory. "Your father and I have a different kind of life ahead of us," she continued. "We can't go on the way things were." I laughed nervously. "Okay." And then my father finally spoke. "You should start thinking about moving out." I genuinely didn't process the words at first. Move out. I blinked. Move out of where? My mother gestured toward the front door. Out of the house. The silence that followed felt surreal. I actually glanced behind me, half expecting someone else to be standing there, someone they meant to address, but no, their eyes were fixed on me. "This is my house," I said quietly. My mother exhaled, as if my reasonable protest was some unreasonable inconvenience. "Elena, don't make this into something dramatic. We've won the lottery. Our lives are different now. We need space. Privacy. People of our standing around us. People of our standing." Those words cut deeper than any shouting would have. I steadied myself. "I've lived here for years. You live here because I invited you to." My father shook his head. "That was before. Now we can afford better." Better. Not family. Better. It was then I noticed the new locks already fitted to the door. My stomach fell. They had organized all of this while I was at work, while Daniel was thousands of miles away. My suitcases had been packed with care. Even my framed photographs had been stacked neatly beside them. My entire life, folded into luggage. My mother picked up one of the bags and pushed it in my direction. "There's no room for beggars here anymore," she said, her voice perfectly level. That word rang through me. Beggars. After everything. After years of support, of opening my home, of trusting them without question. I waited for guilt to cross their faces. It never came. My father was already scrolling through his phone, as though the conversation had concluded the moment he'd decided it had. I understood then that they genuinely believed they had won everything: power, authority, ownership, even the right to erase me from my own story. I stepped outside slowly. The evening air felt sharp. Neighbors watched from across the street, some whispering, some simply staring. No one spoke up. The door swung shut behind me, and then I heard it, the click of the lock turning. They had locked me out of my own house. For a moment, tears pressed behind my eyes. I could have screamed. I could have called the police. I could have stood there and laid out every truth in front of those watching neighbors. But instead, I began to laugh quietly, almost to myself. Not because anything was funny, because something had become unexpectedly clear. People don't reveal who they truly are when life is hard. They reveal it when they believe they've already won. And my parents believed exactly that. I picked up my bags. No fury, no raised voice, just a strange, grounded calm. Through the curtain, my mother watched me leave. She was waiting for pleading, for tears, for some desperate appeal. Instead, I looked at the house one last time, smiled, and walked away. That night I checked into a small hotel. I sat alone on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone, dozens of missed calls from relatives calling my parents to celebrate. News articles were already labeling them the luckiest couple in the city. I turned off the screen. For the first time in what felt like forever, the noise stopped. I felt utterly alone. But beneath that loneliness was something unexpected: clarity. If they wanted to play this out, I would let them. Because some victories only look real at the start. The following morning, I made a single phone call. "I need to speak with a lawyer," I said calmly when the line connected. And in that moment, the countdown to my parents' celebration quietly began. 2 weeks went by, 2 long, deliberate weeks. While my parents basked in their new fame, I stayed silent. Television crews interviewed them. Neighbors who'd barely acknowledged them before now gathered at their door. Social media crowned them the luckiest couple in the city. Designer wardrobes, luxury holidays, plans to sell the house once the money came through. I watched it all without bitterness, only patience, because the truth doesn't rush. It simply waits for the right. Mr. Harris was methodical and calm. In our first meeting, he reviewed the documents I laid out before him: property records, purchase confirmations, identity certificates, legal registrations. Every piece of paperwork connected to the house pointed to one person: me. But that wasn't the heart of the matter. The real question was the lottery ticket. He looked at me steadily and asked just one thing: "Are you prepared to let them keep believing they've already won?" I nodded. Sometimes the most powerful move available is silence. Then the day arrived. The official claim ceremony. A grand hall filled with cameras, journalists, and lottery officials. My parents swept in as though they owned the room. My mother draped in jewelry she had already purchased on credit, my father beaming at every camera flash. They greeted the crowd like dignitaries. This, they believed, was the greatest day of their lives. I arrived quietly and waited outside with Mr. Harris. They hadn't noticed me. Not yet. Inside, officials moved through the final formalities before releasing the funds. One last legal check remained, standard procedure, nothing out of the ordinary. At least, that was the expectation. The head lottery lawyer stepped up to the podium, reviewed the documents, and paused. A subtle frown crossed his face. The room fell still. He cleared his throat. Before we proceed with the disbursement, he said carefully, "I require some clarification." My parents smiled pleasantly. The lawyer looked across the room and asked, clearly and deliberately, "Where is the registered owner of this ticket?" The question hit the room like a thunderclap. My parents went rigid. "I beg your pardon," my father said. "We are the winners." The lawyer shook his head with measured composure. The documentation indicates that the registered purchaser and rightful legal claimant is another individual entirely. Confusion rippled through the hall. Reporters muttered. Cameras pivoted. My mother's confidence visibly fractured. "That's impossible. We have the ticket." The lawyer nodded. "You do possess the ticket," he agreed, then paused. "But possession is not the same as ownership." At that moment, the doors opened behind them, and I walked in. Every head in the room turned. My parents stared at me as though I were an apparition. The color drained from my mother's face completely. I crossed the room to the table beside my lawyer, no theatrics, no fury, just presence. Mr. Harris placed the final documents before the officials. Purchase verification, identity confirmation, legal registration. The lottery ticket was mine. I had bought it, registered it in my name, and taken every legal precaution long before anyone had any idea it held a winning number. The room erupted. Cameras flashed in rapid succession. My father's hands began to tremble. My mother whispered, "Elena, what is this?" I met her eyes quietly. "The truth," I said. "The same daughter you called a beggar was the rightful winner all along." The officials transferred the claim to my name. Just like that, the dream they had been living inside dissolved. No confrontation, no speech, no dramatic flourish, because justice has no need for spectacle. It only needs the facts. As security led my parents aside for questioning, my mother finally grasped what had really happened. They hadn't lost money. They had lost trust. And no lottery on earth could purchase that back. Outside, reporters converged on me immediately. One thrust a microphone forward. "Do you have anything to say to your parents?" I smiled, genuinely, without malice. "Yes," I said, looking straight into the cameras. "Never forget who stood beside you before you became lucky." Then I turned and walked away, calm, unburdened, and, for the first time in weeks, finally home.